Story 1. The Haunted House of Everland in Yongin-si, Gyeonggi-do. On a rainy night, Kim Hyun-woo and Lee Ji-won stood at the entrance of Everland. The raindrops patted the ground, and the air was thick with the scent of wet earth. The lights in the distance flickered faintly through the mist, casting eerie shadows. Ji-won shivered, tightening her coat around her as she gazed at the massive theme park before them. "Do we really have to go in?" Ji-won's voice trembled slightly. "I've heard this haunted house is really scary." Hyun-woo chuckled, patting her on the shoulder. "Don't worry, it's just special effects and dummies. We're here for the thrill, right? And I brought my camera, I might even capture some cool shots." Despite her unease, Ji-won nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but we agreed not to go too deep inside. I've heard there are some places in there that feel wrong." Hyun-woo adjusted his camera and nodded in agreement. The two of them walked through the entrance, heading towards the infamous haunted house. The surrounding attractions were mostly deserted due to the late hour and rainy weather, with only a few dim lights illuminating the path ahead. Before entering the haunted house, they encountered the caretaker, Park Seung-hoon. He was dressed in a black uniform and greeted them with a friendly smile. "Welcome to our haunted house. Just remember, don't go too deep, stay within the safe areas." Ji-won wanted to remind Hyun-woo of her earlier warnings, but he was already eagerly heading towards the entrance. With a sigh, she followed him into the haunted house. As soon as they stepped inside the haunted house, Ji-won felt a chill run down her spine. The cold, damp air from outside mixed with the eerie atmosphere inside, making each step heavier. The door slowly closed behind them with a creak, like the mournful wail of an old house. Hyun-woo, however, was unusually excited. He turned on his camera and began photographing the surroundings. The interior of the haunted house resembled an old Western mansion, with tattered portraits hanging on the walls and a cracked statue standing at the end of the corridor. Every step on the wooden floorboards elicited a creak, as if the entire structure was responding to their presence. "This looks pretty cool," Hyun-woo said, snapping pictures. "The design is really well done." Ji-won clung to Hyun-woo's arm, her eyes darting around the room, feeling as if unseen eyes were watching them from the shadows. The figures in the portraits on the walls seemed to turn their gaze ever so slightly as they passed, their hollow eyes sending shivers down her spine. At the end of the corridor was an ancient wooden door, intricately carved with ornate patterns. Hyun-woo stopped and gently pushed the door open, which creaked as it gave way. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness, with only a sliver of moonlight filtering through the tattered curtains, casting an eerie silver glow over the space. Ji-won instinctively took a step back, but Hyun-woo had already stepped inside. "This might be the scariest part of the haunted house. Let's check it out." Ji-won hesitated but eventually followed him in. The room felt like it hadn't been visited in years, with a musty smell hanging in the air and a pervasive sense of decay. Piles of old furniture were stacked in the corners, and at the center stood a large, cracked mirror. Ji-won could have sworn something moved within the mirror. She froze in fear, tugging on Hyun-woo's sleeve. "Hyun-woo, that mirror ... Something's moving inside it." But Hyun-woo, too engrossed in the scene, ignored her concerns. He eagerly approached the mirror, lifting his camera. "This mirror is so antique. I've got to take a picture." As soon as he pressed the shutter button, a dark shadow flickered across the mirror, and Hyun-woo's camera suddenly malfunctioned, the lens retracting automatically. "What?" Then Hyun-woo frowned, tapping the camera, but it wouldn't turn back on. He was about to try again when he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck, as though something was standing right behind them. "Hyun-woo, let's get out of here. This place feels wrong," Ji-won urged, her voice quivering with fear as her heart raced. But Hyun-woo didn't move. His attention was completely fixed on the mirror. He stepped closer, inspecting the cracks that ran across its surface. The cracks seemed to form a pattern, almost like some ancient script. "These cracks ... they don't look natural," Hyun-woo murmured, tracing the lines with his fingers. "Doesn't it look like some kind of old writing?" Ji-won reluctantly glanced at the mirror again and saw what he meant. The cracks did indeed resemble symbols, not mere damage. Her unease deepened, and she wanted to pull Hyun-woo away, but found herself rooted to the spot as if something was holding her in place. Suddenly, a faint figure appeared within the mirror. It was a girl, dressed in a tattered white dress, her face pale as death. She stood in the reflection, her hollow eyes staring back at the two of them from the other side of the glass. Ji-won screamed, stumbling backward, "Hyun-woo, run!" But Hyun-woo seemed entranced, oblivious to Ji-won's cries. His gaze was locked onto the girl in the mirror, as if her empty eyes held some irresistible pull. The girl's figure grew clearer, and she slowly raised a hand, touching the inside of the mirror. As she did, the cracks began to heal, the mirror's surface smoothing out as if the girl were repairing it. But this was no good omen. As the mirror restored itself, the temperature in the room plummeted, and the air grew thick with the stench of blood. Ji-won felt a wave of nausea wash over her, barely holding back the urge to vomit. The girl in the mirror suddenly lunged out, moving so fast that neither of them had time to react. Hyun-woo felt an icy chill sweep over him as the girl's figure materialized before him. Her face was inches from his, allowing him to see her features clearly. Her skin was as white as paper, her eyes sunken deep into her skull, and her lips twisted into a grotesque smile. She slowly lifted a hand, caressing Hyun-woo's face with fingers as cold as ice. "Help!" Ji-won finally broke free from the invisible force holding her back and rushed to Hyun-woo, trying to pull him away from the ghostly girl. But her hands passed right through him as if Hyun-woo was no longer there, as if the girl had pulled him into another dimension. Panic and dread surged through Ji-won. She realized they had crossed into something beyond the ordinary, something she couldn't comprehend. Hyun-woo's body began to convulse, as though some external force was controlling him. His eyes slowly closed, and when he opened them again, they were void of life. The girl's shadow slowly merged with his body, as if she had never existed at all. Ji-won stepped back in horror, a cold sweat breaking out across her skin. She was at a complete loss, her mind filled with terror and helplessness. Tears streamed down her face as she watched Hyun-woo, unable to do anything to help him. Just then, the door to the room suddenly swung open, and Park Seung-hoon appeared in the doorway. His expression was grim as he hurried over to Hyun-woo, holding a charm inscribed with strange symbols. "Take this." Quickly, Park Seung-hoon handed the charm to Ji-won. "Place this on his forehead." Now, Ji-won acted on instinct, taking the charm with trembling hands and pressing it against Hyun-woo's forehead. As soon as the charm made contact, Hyun-woo's body jerked violently, his eyes clearing slightly as the girl's shadow was forcibly separated from him and pulled back into the mirror. Hyun-woo collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Ji-won knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him tightly, tears of relief mixing with the rainwater on her face. Park Seung-hoon glanced at the mirror before covering it with a black cloth. He sighed deeply, explaining, "You shouldn't have come into this room. That mirror is used to seal away a powerful vengeful spirit." Ji-won finally understood. The girl in the mirror was the same girl who had disappeared years ago. According to legend, her soul had been trapped in the mirror for some unknown reason, and the cracks on the mirror were symbols meant to suppress her spirit. Her family, devastated by her disappearance, had hired a famous shaman to seal her spirit, hiding the mirror within the haunted house. But the seal wasn't perfect. Over time, the mirror's power weakened, allowing the girl's spirit to grow stronger until she could briefly escape the mirror, searching for a replacement new soul to take her place. "And what about you?" Ji-won asked, remembering Park Seung-hoon's earlier warnings. "You knew about this. Why didn't you stop us?" Park Seung-hoon gave a bitter smile. "I'm only here to maintain the place, but I can't stop everyone from going in. As long as you didn't touch the mirror, you would have been fine." Ji-won was at a loss. She didn't know whether to thank him or blame him, but at that moment, all she wanted was to get Hyun-woo out of there. With Park Seung-hoon's help, Ji-won and Hyun-woo finally left the haunted house, stepping into the cold night air. The rain had stopped, but the gloom in Ji-won's heart remained. She clung to Hyun-woo's hand, afraid that he might lose consciousness again. Back in the car, Hyun-woo seemed to return to normal. He checked the photos on his camera, finding nothing out of the ordinary. Every shot showed only the usual haunted house scenes, as if the terrifying events had never happened. These photos, everything looks normal, Hyun-woo said, puzzled. Ji-won said nothing, staring silently out the window as rainwater trickled down the glass, blurring her vision. However, as they prepared to leave, Ji-won caught a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Reflected in her eyes was the shadow of the girl, as if she was trying to re-enter the real world through Ji-won's own reflection. She quickly looked away, tears welling up in her eyes again. The horror of the experience had left an indelible mark on her, a haunting presence that would never truly leave them. Story 2. The Haunted House of Seoul Land. On a chilly autumn night, Park Sang-won and his friend Choi Min arrived at Seoul Land, eager to experience the famous haunted house. Seoul Land, nestled within Seoul Grand Park, is renowned for its diverse attractions and unique spots, but its most challenging attraction is the haunted house. Are you sure you want to go in? I've heard this haunted house is really scary, Minna said, eyeing the castle-like building before them with a mix of curiosity and fear. Sang-won laughed, patting her shoulder. We're already here, so we might as well go in. Besides, no matter how scary it is, it's all just special effects and sound, right? Despite her unease, Minna was persuaded. The two walked towards the entrance of the haunted house, the night air carrying a slight chill that sent shivers down their spines. The lights outside the haunted house flickered intermittently, as if warning them of the dangers within. They pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped into a dimly lit corridor. The door creaked loudly behind them as it slowly closed, cutting off their connection to the outside world. I guess we'll have to find our way out ourselves, Sang-won joked, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping into his mind. As soon as they entered the haunted house, Minna felt an inexplicable sense of pressure. The corridor was filled with an eerie atmosphere, and the paintings on the walls seemed to be watching them, making her skin crawl. The floorboards creaked under their feet, echoing the ancient, decayed state of the house. This place is really creepy, Minna whispered, glancing around nervously as she tightened her grip on Sang-won's hand. At the end of the corridor was a wooden door adorned with intricate carvings, standing out in stark contrast to the rest of the dilapidated surroundings. Sang-won pushed the door open and led Minna into a dimly lit room. The room was furnished with old, heavy furniture, and at the center stood a sturdy wooden table covered in dusty, yellowed books and an antique lamp. The lamp's faint light illuminated part of the room, leaving the rest shrouded in darkness. It looks like a study, Sang-won said as he approached the table, casually flipping through the books. Suddenly, one of the books flipped open on its own, as if controlled by unseen force. Don't touch that, Minna shouted, feeling the chill in the air grow stronger. Sang-won was about to close the book when he heard a low, menacing laugh. The sound seemed to come from all around them, sending a shiver down his spine. He quickly pulled his hand back, scanning the room for the source of the sound. It's probably just a sound effect. This is a haunted house, after all, he said, trying to calm himself as well as Minna. However, every step they took only intensified the growing sense of dread. Books began to fall from the shelves without reason, and the paintings on the walls started to distort, as if the figures within were struggling to break free. On the other side of the room, a staircase led to the upper floor, seemingly into the heart of the haunted house. Sang-won hesitated for a moment, but eventually decided to continue. Let's go up. There might be an exit. Minna was reluctant, but stayed close behind him. The stairs creaked ominously with each step, threatening to give way at any moment. As they ascended, they could feel unseen eyes watching them from the shadows, ready to engulf them at any second. Reaching the second floor, they were greeted by a long hallway lined with antique furniture and mirrors hanging on the walls. Minna stared into one of the mirrors and suddenly noticed that her reflection was making a different expression from her own. Startled, she stumbled back, knocking into a cabinet behind her. "Sangwon, something's really wrong here." Minna's voice trembled, on the verge of tears. Sangwon was beginning to feel uneasy as well. He approached one of the mirrors, trying to discern if there was anything strange about it. But aside from their reflections, the mirrors showed nothing unusual. However, Sangwon noticed a faint light flickering from a room at the end of the hallway. "Maybe that's the exit," Sangwon said, trying to steady his nerves. He walked towards the source of the light, but found the door to the room tightly shut. The door was secured with a rusty old lock that hadn't been touched in years. "Should we go in?" Minna asked anxiously, already regretting coming in with Sangwon. "We have to find a way out," Sangwon said firmly, deciding to try opening the door. He found a stone and struck the lock with all his strength. After several attempts, the lock finally broke, and the door creaked open, revealing the room inside. The room contained an ancient bed, covered in tattered sheets. On the bedside table stood an old candelabrum, the candles long since extinguished, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. In one corner stood a wardrobe, its door slightly ajar, as if something was hidden inside. Minna clung to Sangwon's arm, too scared to take another step. However, Sangwon's curiosity overcame his fear, and he slowly approached the wardrobe, pushing the door open. Inside the wardrobe, a pale face suddenly appeared. It was a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing, her eyes hollow and lifeless, her lips twisted into a sinister smile. Minna screamed and stumbled backward, collapsing to the floor. "Run!" Sangwon shouted in terror, grabbing Minna as they bolted from the room. They dashed down the stairs, back to the first floor of the haunted house, only to find that the exit had vanished, replaced by a solid wall of darkness. "This can't be happening." Sangwon pounded on the wall in desperation, desperately searching for the way out. Suddenly, all the lights in the room went out, plunging the entire haunted house into an eerie silence. In the darkness, they heard the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps approaching them. Minna clung to Sangwon, both of them frozen in place, too terrified to move. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until a shadowy figure appeared in the faint light. It was a woman dressed in a tattered kimono, her face pale, her eyes void of life, with a chilling smile on her lips. She slowly approached them, holding an ancient fan stained with dark red blood. "Stay away," Sangwon shouted in fear, but the woman ignored his pleas, continuing to advance toward them. Just as the woman was about to reach them, Minna suddenly felt something warm in her pocket. She reached in and pulled out a small jade pendant, which glowed faintly, pushing back the darkness around them. The woman's figure wavered and then vanished. "What is this?" Sangwon asked, staring at the glowing jade pendant in Minna's hand. Minna, breathing heavily, tried to remember where the pendant came from. She suddenly recalled that it was a family heirloom, passed down from her grandfather, who had told her it was an ancient talisman meant to ward off evil spirits. "It's my grandfather's talisman, it saved us," Minna murmured, still in shock. At that moment, a light flickered on in the corner of the room, illuminating a hidden doorway. Sangwon and Minna exchanged hopeful looks and quickly made their way to the door, pushing it open. Beyond the door was a narrow passageway, with a faint glimmer of light at the end, leading outside. Without hesitation, they hurried through the passage and finally escaped the haunted house. The fresh air outside was a welcome relief, and the starry night sky above them made them feel safe again. Exhausted, they collapsed onto the ground, breathing in the crisp night air, their fear slowly subsiding. Despite their escape, the terrifying experiences they had inside the haunted house lingered in their minds. They decided to report the incident to the park management, hoping someone would investigate the dark secrets behind the haunted house. A few days later, Sangwon and Minna returned to Seoul Land and sought out the staff responsible for the haunted house. They described their ordeal, but the staff insisted that the haunted house had been closed for months, and everything inside was just decoration. There was no way anything supernatural could have happened. Shocked, Sangwon and Minna were convinced that what they had experienced was real, but no one believed them. They left Seoul Land, their minds full of unanswered questions. Back at home, Minna took out the jade pendant once more, noticing that it no longer glowed, as if it had completed its purpose. She turned the pendant over and discovered a small inscription on the back that read, "May you always be safe." She stared at the pendant, feeling a chill run down her spine, as if something was still watching them. Though they had escaped the haunted house, the cold dread in their hearts never truly left. The woman in the house, the disappearing exit, the mysterious talisman, all these mysteries lingered, reminding them that their experience that night was no mere illusion. Months passed, and Sangwon and Minna never returned to Seoul Land. The memories of that night haunted them, turning into nightmares they couldn't shake. Minna often dreamed of the woman in the kimono, slowly approaching her with that eerie smile. Every time she woke from these dreams, she felt the same cold dread, as if the woman had never really disappeared. Sangwon, too, couldn't escape the unease. He often thought about the darkness and fear of that night, feeling as if something had taken root deep within him, something that wouldn't let go. Though they knew it was over, every time they remembered that night, their hearts filled with fear and doubt. The haunted house, the jade pendant, the mysterious woman, these unsolved mysteries lingered in their minds, like a never-ending nightmare. Story 3. The Haunted Park in Gwangalli, Busan. Gwangalli in Busan is famous for its beautiful beach and the stunning views of the Gyeonggi-do Bridge. However, hidden in this lively area is a lesser-known place, the Haunted Park. This park has a long history. Once a popular amusement park, but it became infamous after a series of mysterious deaths occurred, leading to its eventual abandonment. Kang Seong-ho, a university student with a deep interest in paranormal phenomena, decided to explore this notorious location with his friends. Joining him were his two close friends, Kim Ji-yeon and Park Jang-suk. They planned this adventure on the eve of Halloween, hoping to uncover the truth behind the many ghost stories that surrounded the park. "Have you heard about the girl who disappeared on the carousel?" Ji-yeon asked Seong-ho and Jang-suk as they made their way toward the park, her voice tinged with both fear and excitement. "That's just a legend," Jang-suk replied with a grin. "But tonight, we'll see if there's any truth to these stories." Seong-ho remained silent, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease growing in his chest. As they approached the desolate park, a cold sea breeze blew against them, carrying the scent of saltwater mixed with the faint odor of decay. They pushed open the rusted iron gate and stepped into the forgotten place. The abandoned rides creaked eerily in the wind, as if whispering the horrors that had once transpired there. At the park's entrance, a broken wooden sign leaned precariously against the ground, with the faded words "Welcome" barely legible. Seong-ho turned on his flashlight, its weak beam barely illuminating the path ahead. The three of them walked slowly along the overgrown trail, moving deeper into the park. The silence was oppressive, with only the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty park. The abandoned rides loomed ominously in the darkness, and the broken-down carousel stood before them, the smiling animal figures seeming to mock their presence. "This place gives me the creeps," Ji-yeon whispered, staying close behind Seong-ho. Jang-suk approached the carousel, running his hand over the head of one of the wooden horses. "Do you think anyone really disappeared here?" "Stop thinking about it," Seong-ho said, trying to keep his voice steady. "These are just old, broken rides. No one's going to disappear." Just then, the carousel emitted a low, grinding noise and slowly began to turn on its own. The three of them jumped back in shock, staring in disbelief at the seemingly alive ride. "What the hell?" Jang-suk asked, his voice trembling. "There's no way this place still has power, right?" Seong-ho stared at the carousel, an overwhelming sense of unease growing inside him. He stepped forward, intending to turn off the machine, but the closer he got, the stronger the sense of dread became. He suddenly stopped and turned back to Ji Yi-an and Jang Suk. "We need to leave. Something's really wrong here." Ji Yi-an nodded quickly, and the three of them turned to leave. However, after only a few steps, Seong-ho felt as if something was following them. He spun around and saw a blurry figure sitting on one of the horses. "Look, there's someone on the carousel." Seong-ho pointed, his voice filled with fear. Ji Yi-an and Jang Suk followed his gaze, and sure enough, they saw a girl in a white dress sitting on the carousel, her long hair blowing gently in the wind. Her expression, however, was eerily blank and cold. Ji Yi-an couldn't hold back a scream. "This can't be happening, we didn't see her before." Seong-ho and Jang Suk were equally stunned by the sudden appearance of the girl. Instinctively, they backed away, desperate to distance themselves from the eerie carousel. The girl seemed to notice them, slowly raising her head to meet Seong-ho's gaze. Seong-ho's heart raced as if something had pinned him to the spot, making it impossible to move. The girl's eyes were hollow, almost as if they could peer into his very soul and see his deepest fears. "We have to get out of here." Jang Suk's voice trembled as he grabbed Seong-ho's arm, trying to pull him away. With great effort, Seong-ho broke free from the girl's gaze and turned to run, following Ji Yi-an and Jang Suk. They sprinted through the dark park, feeling as though countless eyes were watching their every move, pressing down on them with overwhelming force. "There's a haunted house up ahead." Ji Yi-an suddenly shouted, "Let's hide inside." Without thinking, the three of them dashed into the dilapidated haunted house. The door slammed shut behind them with a loud bang, the sound echoing ominously. The inside was pitch black, save for the faint light from Seong-ho's flashlight. They gasped for breath, trying to calm their racing hearts. What do we do now?" Ji Yi-an asked, her voice trembling with fear and desperation. Jang Suk didn't answer, instead scanning the rundown haunted house. The interior was sparsely furnished, with old decorations hanging haphazardly on the walls, all covered in a thick layer of dust. The air was thick with the smell of rot and decay. "We should stay here for now, at least until things quiet down outside," Seong-ho suggested, trying to keep his voice steady, but the unease he felt only grew stronger. The haunted house had an inexplicable atmosphere, as if something sinister was lurking in the darkness, waiting to consume them. Just as they began to let their guard down, faint footsteps echoed from one of the corners of the house. The three of them tensed up immediately, and Seong-ho shined his flashlight toward the source of the sound, but there was nothing there. "Maybe it's just rats," Jang Suk offered, though his voice betrayed his own fear. The footsteps sounded again, this time closer. Seong-ho slowly approached the area, his flashlight illuminating the darkness. Suddenly, the beam caught a figure standing in the shadows, a man dressed in tattered clothing, his face pale, and his eyes vacant as he stared blankly at them. Seong-ho nearly screamed but managed to hold it in. He slowly backed away, motioning for Ji Yi-an and Jang Suk to stay quiet. The three of them huddled together, trying to control their breathing and their rising terror. The man, however, didn't stop. He began to walk toward them, a twisted smile forming on his lips. Seong-ho felt as if his blood had turned to ice. He knew they couldn't stay here any longer. "Run," he whispered urgently, and the three of them bolted out of the haunted house, sprinting in the direction they had come from. They didn't stop running until they reached the entrance of the park. All three of them were gasping for breath, their hearts pounding in their chests. "We have to get out of here now," Seong-ho gasped. "There's something seriously wrong with this place." Jang Suk nodded, still trying to make sense of what they had just encountered. "Those figures we saw, were they really ghosts?" "I don't know, but we shouldn't stay to find out," Seong-ho said, his voice laced with urgency. "We need to get back to safety." Just as they were about to leave, the park's exit suddenly vanished, replaced by a thick fog that obscured their vision. Through the fog came the sound of low whispers, as if countless voices were speaking all at once. "This can't be real," Ji-yeon whispered in terror. The exit was right here. Seong-ho tried shining his flashlight into the fog, but the beam was weak and couldn't penetrate the dense mist. A cold dread washed over Jang-suk as he realized they might never escape this cursed place. "We need to get back to the haunted house," Seong-ho said suddenly. "At least there are walls there. Maybe they can protect us from whatever's out here." The three of them hurried back to the haunted house, slamming the door shut behind them in an attempt to block out the unknown threat creeping ever closer. The house fell silent once more, but the ominous atmosphere continued to weigh heavily on them. Seong-ho's gaze fell on a painting hanging on one of the walls. It was an old family portrait, showing a large family smiling for the camera. But as Seong-ho looked closer, he realized that some of the people in the portrait bore a striking resemblance to the figures they had just encountered in the park. These people might have been the original owners of the park, Seong-ho whispered. "But why? Why are they like this?" Ji-yeon suddenly remembered an old story. "I heard that the park's owner used to mistreat the workers. The workers eventually rebelled and set the park on fire, killing many people. Maybe what we saw were their vengeful spirits." Jang-suk shivered at the thought. "So, what do we do? Just wait here to die? We have to find a way out," Seong-ho said, determination hardening his voice. "We can't stay here and let them trap us." As they discussed their escape plan, the temperature in the haunted house dropped suddenly, and a low, ominous chanting began to echo from outside the walls. The sound felt as if it came from another realm, filled with an overwhelming pressure that left them paralyzed with fear. Then, without warning, blood began to seep from the walls of the haunted house, and the figures in the painting started to twist and contort as if trying to escape the confines of their frames. The three of them backed into a corner, realizing there was nowhere left to run. Seong-ho suddenly remembered the map he had in his pocket, a map they had found online before coming here. He quickly pulled it out and saw that it marked a hidden exit, located right behind the haunted house. "We need to go there, now," Seong-ho shouted. "It's our only chance." With all the strength they could muster, they dashed out of the haunted house, sprinting toward the marked location. The sound of footsteps followed them, growing louder as if countless spirits were chasing them down. At last, they found the hidden exit, marked on the map, a rusty iron gate concealed behind thick bushes. Seong-ho pushed the gate open with all his might, and the three of them tumbled through, landing on the ground outside. The gate slammed shut behind them with a loud clang, cutting off the shadows of the haunted park. Outside was Gwangalli's busy street, with the bustling city life and bright streetlights making them feel safe again. Exhausted, they collapsed on the ground, gulping in the fresh air, relieved to have survived. "We made it out," Ji-yeon's voice trembled as tears streamed down her face. Seong-ho looked back at the iron gate, still shaken by what they had experienced. They had escaped the park, but the terror still clung to their hearts. He knew that the secrets of that park would likely remain buried forever. Though they had survived, the vengeful spirits of the park remained, waiting in the darkness for the next unfortunate souls to stumble upon their domain.